Welcome everyone. My name is Angela Henry. This is a session profiling your data. Quick bit about me. I live in High Point, North Carolina in the US. That's on the East Coast. I'm a solution architect at Blue Granite. I am a data platform MVP. I do tweet out there on Twitter. My handle is SQL Swimmer. And why? Well, because not only am I a swimmer, but I'm also a coach and an instructor. And I'm going to kind of get out my soapbox here and say, if you don't know how to swim, please learn. It's the only sport that can save your life. And if you think as an adult that you cannot learn how to swim, you are absolutely incorrect. There are instructors like myself who are specially trained to teach adults how to swim, because it's very different than teaching a child how to swim. But I do also teach little kids and I coach little kids. And sometimes as young as 4 years old. So I have a lot of energy and I do tend to start talking super fast, because trying to keep the attention of a 4-year-old when they're freezing in the water, it doesn't work. So I have to talk super fast. Somebody just asked if I could turn my camera on. Oh, no, never mind. It was Demir asking somebody to turn their camera off. Okay, never mind. All right, I'm going to try and ignore the chat window here, and we'll keep going. So that was my soapbox. So that's a little bit about me. Now I want to know a little bit about you all. So who are you? Are you a developer? Are you DBA? Are you an architect? Are you an analyst? Or something that I didn't mention? And feel free to type that in the chat window so I can kind of see. Normally when I do this presentation in person, I just have people raise their hands to tell me so I can get an idea of who I'm actually talking to. But without that, in-person interaction, we have to rely on the chat window and things like that. So fill in what you are, because I want to get an idea of who's listening today. And we have a little bit of a lag, so it kind of takes a I don't know, a little bit for that to show up here. All right, so we got some architects, some DBAs, some developers, some analysts. Nice. All right, we got a really good mix today. That's awesome. Well, you are actually all of my target audience. Oh, and a data engineer. Nice. All right. Okay. Well, I think all of you will benefit from what I'm going to talk about today. So thank you for showing up and for listening. And what we're going to talk about today is what is data profiling. We're going to define that. We're going to talk about why you would want to do it, and then how you would go about doing it. So before we get started, I am going to take a selfie here, because we all know that nothing is really official unless you take a picture and you post it up on social media. So that's what I am doing right now. I would highly encourage you all to do the same. Once again, we are not meeting in person, so I can't see your bright, shiny faces. And that's like the best part of delivering a session, is kind of seeing your faces and seeing, that kind of light bulb go off. So please, please, please go out there, put it out on Twitter. I want to see your bright, shiny face. All right, let's keep going. Selfie is done. All right, so what is data profiling? It's very simple. It's just gathering metadata about your data. That's all it is. So, and at a minimum, things that you're going to need a distinct and a percentage count for your data, percentage of zeros, blanks, and nulls, the mins, the maxes, average string lengths that you've got in your data. Numerical ranges, super important, helping you decide on what data type you need to use. And date ranges, again, super important if you want to know what outliers are and stuff like that. So date ranges are super important. So those are all things that are at a minimum you need to do a decent job at profiling your data. Now, there are some great to have things. One of those great to have things is key integrity. So trying to figure out the cardinality of something. Is it unique? Can we use it as part of the key? And in that, that's where the cardinality comes in, is how unique is that data? And then patterns. Are there certain patterns in your data? If you are looking, if a field has been defined as an email address, you can use a pattern matching to make sure that everything actually matches the correct pattern for an email address. Or you can even discover patterns that you weren't even looking for. And then frequencies. How frequently does this data occur? So those are some great to haves. So that's kind of what data profiling is. Now let's talk about why you would want to use it. Well, first and foremost, it's going to make your life a lot easier. Knowing the general shape and the distribution of your data, it can save you tons of work and even some heartache down the road. So a good example, in the US, whenever it becomes election time, we get these robocallers where the political parties will call your house, your cell phone, whatever phone number they have, and they will call you nonstop. So what if you are working for one of these robocalling companies and you have a data set and you discover that 90% of those phone numbers contain alpha characters? Well, you know right off the bat that even before you write a single line of code, that campaign is not going to be successful because you have junk data. And if you hadn't profiled your data beforehand, you wouldn't have known that. So you would have gotten a lot of work done and then realized we're not even going to be successful. So like I said, it's just going to make your life easier. Secondly, it helps you analyze your source data more effectively. Again, if you know the general shape of that data, it makes outliers easier to identify. It helps you understand that source data better. Understanding your source data, it can only make you look and perform better. So understanding that data. And lastly, it helps you prevent those data quality issues before they're introduced. So this is a really big thing, especially when we start talking about data governance, where the objective there is high quality data. So preventing data quality issues before they're introduced. Data profiling will absolutely help you with that. So that's kind of what data profiling is and why you would want to do it. Are there any questions out there before we jump into how you would actually do it? I'm going to take this opportunity to let you guys respond with questions in the chat while I take a drink here. No questions? Keep going. All right. Well, all right. So how would you do it? Well, thankfully, Ralph Kimball, who's part of the Kimball Group, and if you are unfamiliar with Ralph Kimball, I consider him the godfather of modern data warehousing. His group came up with the dimensional model, and where you have facts and dimensions and star schemas and all of that. But in addition to that, he also came up with a 4-step method for data profiling. So the first step in the Kimball method is to do it at the start of your project to see if it's even viable. So that goes back to that example that I talked about with the robocalling. You know, if we hadn't looked at our data before we started writing code, we would have written a whole bunch of stuff and realized, well, we can't even make this work because we don't have the data to make it work. So do it at the start of your project. Second step, identify and correct any data quality issues in the source data. Now this one can get a little tricky because sometimes you don't have control over the source data. But if you do, that is the best place to start. Why store bad data when you can fix it? So fix it in the source if you're able to. identify any data quality issues that can be corrected by the ETL. So if you can't correct it in the data source, go ahead and correct it in your ETL process. If you have no control over the data source at all, then correct it in the ETL process. And then lastly, identify unanticipated business rules, hierarchical structures, and foreign key or private key relationships. So you might be thinking, well, how do I identify unanticipated business rules? Well, by profiling your data, you may realize that you know, if we want to, if we're working like in a purchasing environment, we may identify some of those unanticipated business rules just by seeing the data underneath. Well, we can't proceed with this step until this step is done. And maybe that's something that the business completely forgot to tell us, but the data can tell us that. So that's where that will come in. So let's talk tools. That's what you guys are here, is to hear about the tools that you can use to help you profile your data. Now, in all fairness, I did say that this was tools that that SQL Server provides to you, but I also wanted to let you know there are some non-SQL Server based tools out there that can help you. So first of all, there's R. So if there are any R programmers in the house, you know probably already how well R is can handle data profiling. I am not an R person. I look at R and it makes absolutely no sense to me, but that's coming from somebody who's been writing T-SQL for 25 plus years. So if you've got R in your wheelhouse, definitely use it. Azure Data Catalog. This is one that I absolutely love. It does a pretty good job. There are some things I don't like about it, but it meets all of those minimum requirements, and it provides some of those nice to have things. So definitely Azure Data Catalog. Informatica. Informatica is a great product, but it costs like a gazillion dollars. It's super expensive. So unless you work for a company where they don't view IT as a necessary evil, you could probably use Informatica. And if you have that ability, absolutely do. It's a wonderful product. Same for SSIS. They have their own data profiling tool. I have not used it. I have had attendees come up in the past after my session and tell me that they use the SSIS tool and they love it, and then it's got great features. So I'm just passing that along. I have no personal experience with that one. There's Calibra. That's another product that's out there. Again, I have no direct knowledge or personal experience with it, but the people that I have interacted with, they really like it out there. Power BI. So Power BI, was it the end of 2019, end of 2018? I don't know. You know, 2020 seems like it was a decade long, so I can't remember, but it was sometime before 2020. Power BI actually introduced data profiling within Power BI Desktop. So that's an alternative as well. And then lastly, there's this Talend Open Studio for data quality. Now, Talend is the company name, and they have several products out there, but the one I'm referencing here, this Open Studio for data quality, is their free product. Again, I have no direct experience with this one, but from everything I understand, it has limited capabilities, and their paid product has full functionality and is a much better product. But again, no personal experience. I just wanted to let you know that these are some options that are out there. So those are the non-SQL Server based ones. So what about SQL Server based tools that we can use? Well, the obvious one is T-SQL. Like I said, I've been writing T-SQL for over 25 years now. And I have assorted scripts that will help me do all kinds of things. So if I have the ability, I'll write it in T-SQL to get what I need. Data quality services. I don't know how many of you out there use data quality services, but they do actually have a data profiling piece in there. And then lastly, there's SQL Server Integration Services. There is a data profiling task that you can use in your integration services projects to profile your data. So those are the three SQL Server based ones that you've got. So to that end, let's take a look at some of the demos and the things that are being offered. So first, I just wanted to kind of show you the Power BI stuff because Power BI Desktop is a free tool. You can use it at no charge at all. So let's start by looking at Power BI Desktop and what it offers. So I'm going to bring this up. So I have just a really small data model here. I've just got a few tables over here on the right-hand side. And if you want to take a look at that data profiling, we're going to go ahead and go into from the queries section of the home tab or the home menu. We're just going to go to transform data. And of course, it opened up on the other screen. So I'm going to pull it back over here so y'all can see it. All right. And you can see I have got these 4 tables over here. Now, when you look at this, if you've never used the data profiling things before, they are not turned on by default. So to turn them on, we're just going to go to the View ribbon, and we can select the column quality. You'll notice we've got these valid, error, and empties that popped up. We've got column distribution. So now we've got some nice little histograms here that show up. And then lastly, there's the column profile, and that shows up down here at the bottom of the screen. So this is some really good information. And you'll notice, let me zoom in here. Over here on the lower right-hand side, we've got our column statistics, and that's got all of those minimum things that we were looking for: the count, the distinct, the empty, the unique, how many are 0, the mins, the max. We've got average. We've got our standard deviation, even, odd, those parity things in there. Great. So that's wonderful. But the cool thing that I wanted to show you with this within Power BI Desktop is you look at this value distribution and you're like, well, that's really not that helpful. But there's this little ellipsis over here on the right-hand side of that. So if we click that, we get some options. Now we can group it by the value, which is what it does by default. You can group it by sign. Right now it looks like everything is positive. And you can group it by parity, so those even and odd. So when we look at a whole number, that's probably not very interesting, but let's look at a name. So we get some different information, some different column statistics that show up here. Again, min and max, I'm not super happy with when it comes to text data because that's not really very helpful. What would be more helpful is column length distribution. So when we come over here to the value distribution area and we click again on the little ellipsis, we get different options, and lo and behold, one of those is text length. And now we can see that lovely little graph of our text length distribution. So to me, that's like absolutely wonderful. And there's one other data type that is super cool that I wanted to show you, and that is the dates. So I'm going to select a date field here. Again, we've got our lovely little column statistics. Our min, our max, our average date, the value distribution here. And when we come to our ellipsis, look at what we can do now. We can now, because it's a date data type, we can group it by the year. So we can see, oh, we've only got things in the year 2013 and 2014. We can group it by the month. We can group it by the day. So very cool. So there is some really cool stuff here, the day of the week. All that functionality exists here. Now, the thing that, I mean, this is all wonderful, but it's very manual, and you have to, point and click to be able to look at very different things. Well, under the covers, what this profiling stuff is doing is it's using the table.profile. And that's what I did up here. It's the M code. And if we come back to source, here's that table.profile. So this is M code right here. So this is the language that Power Query uses behind the scenes for Power BI. So all I'm doing is saying, let's look at the application people table and give me a table profile of that. And look, here's all of that information over here that was summarized in the lower half when we would click on individual columns, but now we can see it for every single column all at once. So then what I did is I just went through and I did this for every single table. And if I go back to my Power BI desktop file, and I come over here and I look at my profiling tab that I've created here with some really fun colors, I have basically merged it all together, and I can filter it based on what table I want to look at. And with Power BI, you can click the little ellipsis and you can export that data. So if you need to be able to share this information with somebody and they don't want to look at Power BI desktop, you can export this and send them a CSV file and they can go to town on that. So that is a very cool feature that we have for Power BI desktop. One thing I did want to point out though, is we're going to come back over here to our transform data. And down here in the lower right-hand corner, you'll notice that it says the column profiling is based on the top 1,000 rows. So if you have a large data set, that's not very helpful. And you know, the first time I noticed that when this was just in preview, I was like, well, geez, that's basically not helpful at all. You might as well not even have it. And with most Microsoft products, if something appears in the lower left-hand status, it typically means that it's just a status and you can't do anything with it. But look at this. So let me zoom in. Ooh, I'm not going to do that. We'll turn that off because that turned a funky color on my side. But if you hover over that, you'll see that it highlights. And if you click on it, you now have the option to say, I want to profile based on the entire data set. So, yay. So just know that if you want to profile based on the entire data set, it's going to profile on the entire data set. So if you were bumping up against some production data, you could experience some performance issues in your production system. So if you want to do this, I would suggest you do this during non-peak times if you have large data sets. I don't want anybody to lose their job because they took production down so they could profile their data. And they said, well, I saw Angela do it and it was super fast. Well, thanks for using my name, but I don't want to be associated with you losing your job. So just know that it will do the entire data set. All right. So that is Power BI. So let's get back to our slide deck and go through this really quick. So Power BI is really great, but it has limited string length statistics. You can get to them, but it's kind of hard to get to them. And there's no way to do those individually. Like I showed you, you had to kind of point and click. It's a very manual process. So you saw that I had to go out and I had to use create 4 queries, one for each of my 4 tables, and then put it all together. So it is a very manual process. And by default, it only looks at the first 1,000 rows. So, I mean, you can change that, but if you didn't know that, you could be making decisions not realizing that you're looking at something that is very statistically insignificant when you want to talk about the entire profile. So with that, do we have any questions about Power BI before I go on to the next section? I'm going to take this opportunity for you guys to put stuff in the chat, and I'm going to take a drink.
For now, there is no questions.
Okay.
All
right.
There was only if you can zoom something, but Kay Sauter told us a big secret that actually you can zoom in the Teams window by using Control key and mouse wheel, and this is fantastic.
It is. That was like life-changing when I discovered that. So absolutely, you can do that. That's one of the reasons why I love it when user groups use Teams to host speakers, because I don't have to always worry about making sure that I have the right resolution. And people can zoom in and out as they need to. So.
And you have a question now.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Can we have multiple data servers to integrate data from? So I'm assuming you're referring to Power BI, and you absolutely can. The only caveat to that is that you're going to have to use import mode to be able to do that, because not every data source type can commingle with other data sources, if that makes sense. So, for example, if you want to connect to Azure Analysis Services or a Power BI data set, you can't mix that with other data unless you import it. So if you wanted to go with a live connection, you can't do that and mix other servers to integrate data from. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay, perfect. All right, next question. Where can we find functions that Power BI uses for the data profile? So M is the underlying language that is used in Power Query, and there is an M reference, and I'm using the letter M to talk about this. That's all, just like you have C and you have C# and F#, it's just the letter M. And if you just go out and Google the M language reference, there's tons of information out there. Microsoft has got some good documentation about it. Razorad out of New Zealand has really good information about data profiling and using that table.profile and lots of cool things that you can do with that. Does that answer your question? There's a lag here, so yes, okay, perfect. All right. So if there are no more questions about the Power BI stuff, we're going to keep going. Is everybody good with that?
Yes.
Okay, well, we'll keep going. All right. So the next one was data quality services. That was the next one on my list. And well, I kind of lied about this one. I'm not going to talk about data quality services. And the reason why is because I have been using data quality services since it was introduced back in 2008 or 8R2 or whatever. And I have never, ever been able to get data quality services, the data profiling piece, to work in a production environment. And if any of you out there listening have been able to get it to work, I want to hear from you, because I've never been able to get it to work. And all the people I have talked to so far, nobody else has ever been able to get it to work either. So if you are that unicorn out there that has been able to get data quality services, the data profiling piece to work, I want to talk to you. Because honestly, I think it's impossible. So we're not going to talk about data quality services. So next on our list was the integration services, the data profiling task. That is what we're going to talk about now. So it's wonderful. I absolutely love this data profiling task. It does, however, have some requirements that we need to talk about. It does require a little bit of setup, and you do have to analyze those results with a separate viewer. But other than that, I absolutely love this. So let's talk about those requirements. The first one, SQL Server is the only data source that you can use. I know, this is where I lose a lot of people. They're like, what? Yeah, I know. It's the only data source that you can use. But if you're in basically if you're in a Microsoft shop, it probably doesn't matter. But if you're using other data sources than SQL Server, this is probably not going to be your silver bullet. And you could go and you could use the Power BI stuff that I showed you, or any of the other third-party products that I talked about earlier. Another one is you're going to need some temp DB permissions. Now, as a former DBA, if I had a developer come to me and request explicit access to temp DB, I might raise an eyebrow and say, why? And as long as they could explain it to me, I was perfectly okay with granting that access. So the temp DB permissions that you need is you're going to need to read, write, and you're going to need to be able to create a table. So those are pretty basic. And again, if you have a stubborn DBA who's very set in their ways and will not grant explicit access to temp DB, just take this to them and say, this is what it's doing and this is why I need it. And any reasonable SQL Server DBA is going to say, oh, okay, perfect. That's fine. Okay, great. Here you go. So just so you know. So let's talk about setup. So there is a little bit of setup that you have to do. You have to figure out which profiles you want to compute. You have to decide where you want to output those profiles to. So this right now, I know doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but once we start talking and looking at the demo, it will make a lot more sense. So with that, let's take a look at this SIS demo for the profiling task. So I'm going to bring up this VM over here and hopefully everybody can see that. All right, so I have, so integration services, if you are unfamiliar, if you want to create an integration services project, you will need Visual Studio to be able to create that. And if you do not have Visual Studio, you're not going to be able to do this. But if you are one of those people like the Analysts or some other not non-techie person, you can go to your developers and you can provide them with this information to let them know. And they can provide that for you. So I have my solution created over here. And I've got my connection managers I've already created for brevity's sake. And then I've got some packages that I've already created. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to open up this one. And we are going to do what's called a quick data profile. So we're going to bring this up. And we're going to come over here to the SIS toolbox on the left-hand side. And right here, a third one down on common, it says data profiling task. And we're just going to drag and drop that onto our workflow canvas. So I've got this red X on here, and in Microsoft terms, that means that there's something broken. It's not going to work. And we hover over it and it says, hey, the destination property is invalid. So we know we have to do something with this. So you just double click on it and we'll go into editing that task. And here's where we can set all of our destination information. So remember I said you had to decide on where you wanted that output of that profile. You have two options. You can send it to a file or you can send it to a variable. Right now, we're going to leave it as a file. I am going to select a destination. We're going to look at the people. So that's the one I want to look at. And I was testing this earlier, so I'm going to leave overwrite destination as true. And then I'm just going to click this quick profile button down here towards the bottom. And this pops up. So now we have some more options that we need to fill in. Now, if you are an integration services developer or familiar with integration services at all, one of the things that they tell you is if you are going to interact with SQL Server data, OLEDB is going to be your fastest connection method. Well, you'll note here, I can only do ADO. ADO is my only option. Well, thankfully, I created an ADO.NET data source connection. So I'm going to select that one. Now I can select which table I want to do this. So we're going to do it for the people. And by default, these are the profiles that are going to run. So we can look at the null ratio, statistics, value length distribution, length distribution. This is a huge one if you are working with character data, and whether it's a candidate key. And you can see we've got some other ones. There's that pattern matching I talked about as a nice to have. And then they also have this functional dependency. So you can figure out whether things are possibly dependent on other tables. So I'm just going to go ahead and click OK. And now that takes us into the Profile Requests tab for our task editor here. And when you highlight one, you can see you have even more information that you can configure. So for our null ratio, we're going to go out and we're going to get this table. We're going to get all columns. And that's just the name of the profile. For our statistics, again, same stuff. But now look what happens when we can look at that length distribution. We have some additional options. We can say ignore leading or trailing spaces. So that's super handy. Value distribution. You have some additional values here. You can set that value threshold. And then for a key profile, you can tell, you've got some more threshold things that you can set. So we're just going to leave everything with default. And I'm going to click OK. And that little red X went away. So now let's go ahead and let's execute this package because we don't have any more configuration to do. So I'm just going to right click and say execute package. And it's going to go out and it's going to, well, that's irritating. It worked earlier this morning. So hang on, let me see what our problem is. Oh, because I didn't set it. All right. Let's come over here. I set that. I left that as false and I needed to set it to true. There we go. Y'all didn't catch my mistake on that one, but that's okay. I'll let it slide just this time. All right, so now let's execute it again. And it's going to execute and it's running and we get the green check saying it's good. We're going to click this link to go back and it's done. We have our profile. Well, where is that profile? Well, there are two places you can find that profile. First of all, we can go back into our data profiling task, and you'll notice we have this button right here that says Open Profile Viewer. So let's go ahead and click that one. And I'm just going to maximize this so that you guys can see it a little bit better. And you can see here we have it. We've got our data source. There's the name of my server. There's the name of my database. And here's the name of my table. And when I highlight any of these, I get additional information that shows up on the right-hand side. So that was my candidate key. Right now it says all of these are, at 100 key strengths. We could use any one of those. Our column length information. So we have our min length, our max length, whether we're ignoring leading or trailing spaces for each one of the columns that are in there. And then here is our length distribution for whatever column we have highlighted up here. So I can change it to fax number, I can change it to full name. And the cool thing here is you can also sort these as well just by clicking on the headers. Now, one thing you might have noticed is I have this 1,000 rows over here on the right-hand side. Now, this is very different from the 1,000 rows that we were talking about in Power BI. So when we look at this, all of this information is basically, it's in an XML file. And we don't store the actual data, we just store the metadata. But if you wanted to look at that data, you have the opportunity to do that. So let's come back over here. Oh, it looks like there it goes. Let's select this. You'll notice that that is now highlighted or enabled. So we can drill down and we can see the actual data. Now, because we're not storing data in this XML file, we have to actually go out and get that. And that's what this 1,000 rows is talking about. Is it saying, go out and get 1,000 rows when I drill down? So when I do that, it now shows up down here on this bottom part, and I can see the first 1,000 rows. It pulls those back. So you can look at basically sample data, or you can look at all rows. So just know that, by default, the data profiling task, it profiles all of your data. But when you want to look at the profile and analyze it, if you want to drill down and see, it's only going to bring back the top 1,000 rows by default, but it is actually profiling all of your data. So that's kind of a big difference between Power BI and this profiling task when it comes to the initial set for profiling your data. So you're thinking, okay, well, that's well and good, but I don't want to have to install Visual Studio for everybody in my company so that they can profile their data. That's just ridiculous. Well, I totally agree with that. So what you can also do is, I said that you could output this to a file, and that's what we did. And it's an XML file. So what you can do is you can have your development staff who have Visual Studio installed. They can run through, they can create these profiles, and then the viewer, the data profile viewer, it's a standalone executable file that is absolutely free to distribute. Microsoft says, yes, you are free to distribute this executable file. Have at it. So you can put this out there in a location where your analysts or your more non-technical people who are going to need to view these profiles can use this to look at those profiles. So I'm just going to go ahead and start this data profile viewer right here. That looks awfully familiar. And now I can come over here and I can open up that one that we just did, and it's exactly the same. So you can distribute that XML file, that is your profile, and you can distribute that executable file. So you don't have to have Visual Studio installed to analyze the results of your profile. You can have development staff do that for you that have Visual Studio installed. So that's pretty cool. But I can hear some of you thinking, yeah, that is pretty cool, but that's still like a really manual process. Well, you're absolutely correct. It is. But remember I said that there were two different output formats. You could have it go to a file, or you could have it go to a variable. So let's go ahead and open up this second package that I have right here. And what I have done is I have, instead of sending this to a file, I'm going to send it to a variable. And then I'm going to inspect that variable, which is an XML format. And then I can make decisions based on that. So in the scenario that I have here, so when I first talked this morning, or at the beginning of the session, I said, you know, the robocallers and people calling you. Well, what if I want to, you know, do a mailing campaign? Well, in the United States, if you don't have a zip code, they had this big push back in the 70s. If there's no zip code, you're probably not going to get your mail. So I want to make sure that the data that I'm looking at has a certain percentage of valid postal codes so that we can make sure that our mailing campaign is successful. So that's the scenario that we're looking at. We're going to go out and we're going to inspect that postal code column. And if the acceptable null ratio is less than or equal to 8%, so if less than 8% of those are null, we're going to figure that that will be a successful campaign, and we're going to go ahead and we're basically going to, you know, load our data, do something with it. But if it is more than 8%, then we're going to say, nope, it's not successful and we need to take some action. So how that looks here is that if it's less than 8%, we're going to come over here and follow this left-hand path. And if it's less than or equal to 8%, we're going to follow the right-hand path. So let's take a look at our data so that everybody is kind of on the same page where we're going to start at. So I have these two tables. One is my source table. That's where I'm going to inspect the data. And then I have a stage table where I'm going to load the data if it meets that minimum requirement of that 8%. And then I just wrote a little stored proc that shows you what the current stored or current postal code null percentage is. So if we run those, so here is my source table. It's got 19,604 rows. My staging table is empty right now. And right now it says my postal code null count is at 14%. So when we come back over here, we should follow this left-hand side because 4% is higher than 8%. We don't want anything higher than 8%. Let's go ahead and execute this one and make sure that it's doing exactly what it needs to do. So it's going through and it says, oh, the postal code ratio is 0.14. And it's going down over here on the left-hand side and it says that's an unacceptable null ratio. And I'm going to click OK. Now, in reality, you're not going to have these little pop-ups. You're actually going to have it do something and take some action. This is just a demo so that you get an idea of the things that you can do with this. So let's go ahead and stop our package from running. Let's pretend that we are sending this off to somebody who has control over that data source and they're cleaning it all up. And now after they've done their cleanup, our new postal code null ratio is at 7%. So, hey, we should be good to go. So let's go back and see if that's true. So over here, we're hoping that we're going to go down this right-hand path and load that data into that staging table. So let's go ahead and execute this package again. Thinking. And look at that. It's 0.07. It's going down this right-hand side. And lo and behold, it says it loaded our stage table. So let's get out of this here real quick. Let's come over and let's take a look to make sure that it really did load that stage table. Let's execute that. And now we have data in there. And you'll see I just plugged in a bogus value so that we could see what was updated. But we did. We loaded all 19,614 rows. So that's pretty cool. So you can see there are huge possibilities here. And in fact, you can use metadata and dynamically create your XML to go out and do all of this. And John Welch, who used to be with Pragmatic Works, wrote a really great article about how to do that. In fact, I still reference it today. He wrote it way back in 2010. And I still go back and reference it today because it's the best article out there about doing this, on how you can dynamically create the profiles that you need and make decisions and not have to point and click. You set it all up with metadata and you're good to go. And I've included a reference to that link in my reference section for the slide deck. So if you have any more questions about that or want to dig a bit deeper, that link is there for you. So that, in a nutshell, is SQL Server, or the integration services piece. So let's get back to our slide deck and just a quick review on the data profiling task. Oh, before we do that, do we have any questions out there? Let's see. So it looks like Kay has a question. So it says, is there any reference to say that this claim that it's free? It's not like you don't believe it. I totally get that. But you want to talk to a customer about this. How would you show them evidence of this? I'm assuming you're talking about the data profile viewer executable, Kay. So I know there is documentation out there. I would have to search through, but I'm sure it's probably buried somewhere in the integration services documentation. I will take that as a takeaway to see if I can find that. And if I can find it, I will put it out there on Twitter. And if you're on Twitter, just watch for what I put out there, and we'll see what we can find. Let's see. And so as a follow-up, is it possible to export metadata from the data profiler in a table or CSV? It is not possible to export that data in a table or a CSV. You get it in an XML format. That's your only option. I am not a huge fan of XML, so I say that very begrudgingly that you can't do it in a table or a CSV. But what you could do is you could automate that process, parse that XML within your integration services project, and then send it out to a CSV or a table. So there's no direct way to do it, but you could do it. Okay, all right. Let's see, another question. Can't we deploy package on SQL Server SysDB, SQL agent job, and just at some location where it would just be saved? You could, yeah, you could absolutely do that. You could run it up there, set that, and then your data analysts would know that this is where they need to go to find those XML files so that they could do the analysis that they need on them. So absolutely, you could do that. Let's see. Great. Okay, awesome. So let's get back to here, our slide deck, and let's do a quick review on the data profiling task, because I know we're gonna coming up on time. So first, again, it's only SQL Server. That's the only data source that is supported in the data profiling task. Big bummer, but again, you get a lot of bang for your buck. And if you're in a Microsoft shop, this is good as gold as far as I'm concerned. You can view the results within Visual Studio itself, or you can use that standalone viewer to view those results with. And you can use a script task to write some XPath queries to make your decisions. So it doesn't have to be a manual process and only one table or one column at a time. You can use metadata to read that in there and dynamically create those XML files that you need so that you can generate those profiles. And just as kind of a quick idea of how you would do this, this is kind of what it looks like when you want to create dynamic XML. Not my favorite task. I absolutely hate XML, and then creating dynamic XML just makes my head hurt even more. So that gives you an idea of what it would look like if you needed to do that. So you can specify your schema name, your table name, all that information. You can specify what, let's see what, oh, where did it go? There it is, my pointer, there it is. Ah. You can specify what profiles you want to look for and everything. And that is how you would profile your data. So in summary, just do it. Now you have no excuse not to profile your data. And I'm just going to share a quick little analogy here. I'm a very big believer in always profiling your data, doing it at the start so you know that you've got good data. The current client that I am working on said, well, we want to go super fast. So so skip all that stuff. Just create this. We know the data is good. So just do it. You don't have to do that. And I trusted the client. Shame on me. Turns out I wasted about a day and a half of development time because their data was not clean, like they said. And had I profiled their data like I always do, I would have discovered that. So lesson learned. Sometimes clients just don't know what's good for them, and you have to follow your own processes so that you don't waste a day and a half of your time. And that's the end of my session. And all my contact information here. Feel free to reach out. The only thing I would ask is that if you do want to reach out to me on LinkedIn, just tell me where you saw me. As a woman in IT, it gets a little sketchy sometimes. So just let me know where you saw me, and I'm more than happy to connect with you on LinkedIn. Not a problem at all. And with that, I'm going to